Was the army doing the similar kinds of things that we've talked about with the intelligence agencies? This kind of same kind of trying to control the direction of
Well,
political power?
the German intelligence landscape in the First World War is obscure in many ways. There are lots of things that are going on. You've got Germany has a military intelligence service called Abteilung, or Section 3B. That's just plain military intelligence. They're constantly trying to collect military information, before the war, about the weaponry and plans of the enemies, and then about what the operational plans were during the war. It doesn't really go much beyond that, though. The German Foreign Office runs a kind of political intelligence service. And that's the one which is much more involved in things like subsidizing subversion in Russia, which is one of the things that the Germans sign on to fairly early. Little diversion here. In 1915, there is a Russian revolutionary who's lived much of his life in Germany, who goes by the code name of Parvis, and he essentially comes to the Germans in Constantinople, interesting enough, in Turkey. He's hanging around there the same time as Botendorf is there, which I find curious. So Parvis, or Alexander Helphand, to give his actual name, comes in and he goes, look, there's a lot of revolutionaries in Russia, and there's a lot of mistrust with the regime. We think that the war will increase the contradictions in Russian society. And if you give me a lot of marks, I can finance this revolutionary activity. And through subversion, I can take Russia out of the war. Well, the Germans are facing a two-front war. That sounds great. We'll use money in order to... But notice what they're doing. The German General Staff, a very conservative organization, not a bunch of revolutionaries, are going to finance revolution in an opposing country. They are going to finance revolutionary subversion to take Russia out of the war, which basically works. So that gives you another idea as to what the German military is willing to do. They're not revolutionaries, but they'll pay revolutionaries to subvert another regime. Now you've got the problem is that the revolutionary regime that your money helped bring to power is now threatening to extend into your country. Mm-hmm. So the whole question for the army and for others in Germany in 1919 is how to keep Germany from going Bolshevik, from, in a sense, being hoisted by your own petard. So the Tuli Society, I don't think, is a huge part of this program, but it is a part of it. And it's all an effort to try to keep control. And that's why the army is financing them. That's even why the army at some point then supplies them with its own propagandists. So the Tuli Society begins to create, under Botendorf's leadership, what he called the Rings of Tuli. And these are satellite organizations that aren't the society as so, but they're kind of controlled and inspired by it. And one of those is a thing called the German Workers' Party. And the German Workers' Party, again, is local. It's not large. It's not terribly influential. But what does it aspire to be? It aspires to be a party that will bring German workers away from the seductive influence of the Bolsheviks and into a more patriotic position, a patriotic. And the way that I describe this is that it's not an anti-communist organization, it's a counter-communist organization. So you don't create something which completely opposes it, you create something which mimics it, which is ultimately what the German Workers' Party will become, is the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Notice that term, socialist. And that is, in my view, what Nazism is from the beginning. It is a counter-communist movement.
And by the way, for people who don't know, the National Socialist German Workers' Party is also known as the Nazi Party. So how did this evolution happen from those that complicated little interplay? We should also say that a guy named Adolf Hitler is in the army at this time.
Yes.
Man.
Well, he's going to come into this because remember, said the army was going to supply its own propagandists to help the German Workers' Party and the Tuli Society do their work. And the propagandist they supply them with is a man who the army trains, sends to classes to learn the art of public speaking and propaganda. And that fellow is Corporal Adolf Hitler.
So how does Adolf Hitler connect with the German Workers' Party?
Well, he'd been in the army during the war, the only regular job that he'd ever had. Kind of liked it. So you often get the view is that, well, at the end of the war, he joined millions of other German soldiers who didn't have jobs. No, he stays in the army. He stays in the army until 1921. He's on the army payroll at the very time in which he is helped to set this up. What appears to have happened is this. Sebottendorf had organized the Tuli Society. That had tried to oppose. There's actually a brief period of time in which the communists actually take over Munich, the Bavarian Soviet Republic, which doesn't last very long. And eventually the army and volunteers put this down. While that's going on, by the way, Hitler is actually sitting in the barracks in Munich wearing a red armband because he is technically part of the soldiers who have gone over to the Bavarian Soviet Republic. He seems to have had flexible interests in this case. So once order is restored, so to speak, the army comes in and decide that, well, one of the things we need to have people who can lecture soldiers on patriotic topics. And so there is a particular captain by the name of Karl Mayr who sort of spots Hitler. He later describes him as like a stray dog looking for a master. Hitler has a knack for public speaking. Other soldiers will listen to him. Yeah, some people can do that. Some people can't. Mayr decides that he's a good candidate for further training. And so, yes, they bring him in. They turn him into what's called a Wehmann, a kind of liaison man. He's an army propagandist. And then you've got this little outfit called the German Workers' Party. And essentially what happens is that Hitler is sent in to take over leadership of that, which is what happens. He shows up, he attends a meeting. There are like 50 people there. By the way, the topic of that, the first meeting he's at is how and why capitalism should be abolished. Okay, which is not what you might well expect. And because remember, the German Workers' Party is trying to cast itself as a counter-Bolshevism. So it's not saying that capitalism is great, which is important. No, capitalism is evil. We agree upon that. We just agree it has to be destroyed from a nationalist point of view, as opposed from some sort of strange internationalist point of view. So Hitler is essentially, as I see it, sent in by the army as their trained man to assume leadership within this small party and to use it for the army's patriotic propaganda campaign. And he succeeds in doing so, even to the name change to the National Socialist or German Workers' Party. I mean, really, what sounds more red than that?